Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the Heinz webinar series, our regular deep dive into the weird and wonderful world of strata and management rights in Queensland. Not just so much Queensland, this is probably more general too. Anyway, what we're talking about this time is general. My name's Chris Irons. I am the director of Strata Solve. That's stratasolve.com.au. And alongside, as per always, Frank Higginson, partner Heinz Legal, which is the premier provider of legal services to the strata industry in Queensland. Frank, welcome.
Hello, Chris. Hello, everyone. Yet again for what will be a very interesting topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get on to said interesting topic, our housekeeping. If you're listening live on YouTube, you can post your questions in the chat. Frank and I welcome those questions. We try and get to as many of them as possible. Keeps us on our toes. It's not legal advice, of course. It's just our off-the-cuff responses. So chuck them in. Or for those listening in later via the podcast aspect, say you're walking the dog, doing the dishes or whatever, you can find all the notes and links that we referred to at heinzlegal.com.au. This week, though, Frank, we're talking about social media and strata and how the two interplay, work, or the rest of it. Let's talk a little bit about social media. I mean, it can be a bit of a sewer, let's admit it.
Unsocial media.
What's your engagement with social media, Frank?
I detest Facebook. I'm a Twitterer. I like Twitter because I think on Twitter I can mute words and phrases and people I don't want to hear about, and I can follow people I want to read about and read links and stuff like that. So that's it. And I'm officially a LinkedIn whore, I will say. You invite me, I will join you, and then if I don't find you interesting, I'll mute you. But that's it. I don't post much though. For me, it's a follow mechanism just to keep an eye on what's going on.
Yeah, right. Okay.
In particular spheres that I want to keep an eye on.
And I think that's a really good illustration, Frank, of the way you can use social media in very different ways for very different objectives. It's not all about the one perspective or the one motivation. I mean, as you know, I'm a frequent content poster on social media sites. It's a good way of generating interest and discussion, which in turn potentially generates people sort of wanting to speak with you. How do I feel about it? Bit like you, Frank. Sometimes good, great way of knowing what is going on and feeling connected. But yeah, it comes with many dangers.
I actually had one randomly enough because I'm sort of not hard to find. I mean, you Google's a wonderful thing, but I did a little interview on Channel 7 News probably 4 or 5 years ago talking about electric vehicles and cars and body corporates and all that stuff that's coming. Maybe that's a future webinar topic, Chris. We want to go there. And anyway, so it was sort of, I finished by saying that this is going to lead to fights, you know, disputes, body corporates not wanting to upgrade infrastructure to service certain owners, and how do you do this and that and the other. And really, I suppose, in a sense, wasn't as positive and glowing about the idea of electric vehicles in strata automatically everywhere. And a bunch of people tracked me down on Twitter and started smashing me up in terms of, you're an idiot, you don't understand. It's just like, whoa, it's the first time I've actually been sort of trolled. But that sort of stuff just does my head in. I know me from a bar of soap.
Fanboys got out there. Yep. It's happened to me as well, Frank. When I've sort of said something and it's then appeared on social media, people have come and sort of looked me up and made their feelings clear. Good and bad arises out of that. I'll say it's about a 50-50 split. It's a relevant topic for this discussion, I suppose, because if you think about our strata legislation, it's all about notices, isn't it? Everything is framed in terms of a notice.
Notice, 2 owners, 2 occupiers, absolutely. And of course, Chris, the legislation specifically deals with social media channels, doesn't it?
Yes, no, it does not. Does not. Look, if we, we've mused upon this topic in the past, that Queensland strata legislation is over a quarter of a century old, largely unchanged. We have had some amendments to take into account electronic voting, electronic meeting, but that's only happened in the last 18 months. So we're obviously way behind the or on video. It poses some issues, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that's, like, for me, probably the idea for this topic came out of a meeting I had with some clients the other day, sort of talking about social media and what they're doing, because the difficulty with, I suppose, not the difficulty with the legislation, the reality of the legislation is that deals with formal notifications around AGMs, about motions, about minutes. This is what the committee decided. Those minutes, notifications, whatever, have to go out within 14, 21 days of something occurring. So you wouldn't call it immediate, and you'd call it fairly static, and you'd say that it's really hard to engage in a meaningful way with anyone else about it, because whatever has happened in those things, or is likely to happen, is done.
Yep.
So, and probably I'm starting to see more and more of this, and I'm sure you are too, mate, in terms of how people in strata communities, and it's a community, all people with a common interest, an aligned interest, how they talk about what's going on outside the scope of probably what the legislation covers, and deal with things more immediately. And my, danger, Will Robinson, it just terrifies me in terms of some of the things, I mean, we'll talk about them today, that might happen off the back of this if people charge in without really thinking about it.
And well, that's the nature of social media, isn't it? It's actually literally charging in without thinking about it. That's what it is. When we talk about what we're really talking about here today, when it all is said and done from a strata perspective, is body corporate records. I think there are other elements as well, but that's the biggest component of what we're talking about today. So we're going to put up a few links to some previous work that's been done. The first link that's going up is a newsletter, Frank, that you've written about body corporate records generally. Then the next link, and these will all appear in due course shortly, will be about our webinar on body corporate records. I think we've done a couple of those, but this is our basic body corporate records webinar. The third link we'll put up is actually the Commissioner's Office page regarding records. I got to say, I go to that page all the time.
Yep.
A lot of practitioners go to that page all the time. It's a great source of information. So we're going to put all those links up. But the interesting thing about it, they're all pretty silent on the issue of social media. Because I think, Frank, we did our usual involved prep for this event. And we determined that we couldn't find a case where social media usage was directly found to be a body corporate record, did we?
No, and it not to say there's not one lurking through the machine, but maybe it hasn't wound people up enough yet to do it. And certainly all of that content that we're putting up doesn't deal with it. So I suppose between the two of us, we're going out on a bit of a limb here today with our 2 cents worth about what this, what social media and strata means and how it relates. So, and I think probably the question is, if Chris and I are two members of a body corporate, not necessarily on a committee, and we're having a chat about, I don't like that body corporate manager. Well, I don't like that resident manager. Well, I hate that body corporate lawyer. We should be going with this person. And I can't believe we got this little bit of advice from this person about that. And they really should go after lot 3, who's not doing what he should be doing in relation to his pet. Is that a body corporate record? And the answer is probably yes. Yeah. I think this is the. Sorry, you go, mate. You go.
No, I was just going to say that you're right, Frank. That's where it gets really tricky, because you are discussing body corporate business, even though it is what you would think would be a sociable, friendly exchange between two individuals. But by virtue of the fact that you are a member of the body corporate, if you start talking about the activities of the body corporate, then we delve into that area where adjudicators have said, once you start discussing the business of the body corporate, that's a record. But then, Frank, it's one thing to communicate those views and air those views, and we were talking about just before we came on air. If you and I are in the lobby of our building and we put up, big 64-point bolded notices on a physical notice board saying John Smith, the chairperson, is a tool and should be removed, And then you put up one that's saying, no, Joan Smith is
I'm not a tool.
Yeah, I'm not a tool. All right. Well, that's a record, isn't
Yep.
it? Okay.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's that. Yeah.
Yep. And if we're having an email exchange about that and we happen to CC the body corporate manager in, that becomes a body corporate record because it's only gone to the body corporate manager by virtue of their engagement by the body corporate
That's
for those
right.
services.
But what happens, as you say, Frank, when that exact exchange, John Smith's a tool, no, I'm not, happens on Twitter or on a series of Facebook posts? If they are not retrieved and added to the body corporate records and then subsequently deleted, for example, there's no record, is there?
No. So it's that old, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it make a noise?
Mm.
So, and I suppose that's the joys of screenshots to a degree, but, for it to be, records are written documents. So for it to form part of the body corporate records, it's got to make its way. Well, not written. I mean, we've got CCTV is, audio recordings are, but they've got to form part of the record. And if they don't, then someone requesting, I want a copy of that Twitter exchange between Frank and Chris. If it's not part of the record, it's not part of the record. Body corporate can't produce something that it doesn't have.
Doesn't have. That's right. So we're really talking about two separate things, aren't we? Would it be a record? And then even if it was a record, what do you do about it if it doesn't actually exist on the records? And then there's the wholly separate issue of I talked about deletion of social media, and people love deleting things on social media all the time. But just because you hit delete doesn't mean it's gone, does it? How many times have we heard about a high profile or a public person who said something in a tweet many years ago that they now regret horribly, but it mysteriously finds its way back into the public domain because it was kept, archived, or cached?
Yep, and that's defamatory material, all that sort of stuff makes it. So yeah, and people particularly tend to screenshot the stuff that could be a little bit inflammatory.
Absolutely, and I haven't done a lot of interaction with it myself, but there are actually, as I understand it, software programs which convert things like texts and possibly social media posts into PDFs, which absolutely then at that point could be saved as a body corporate record. So I think, Frank, what we're talking about though is body corporate business. So let's say you and I are owners in a scheme and we're talking about football on the weekend. That's not going to be a body corporate record because it's not about body corporate business. But if we talk about the fact that the chairman accepted an invite to the football from the majority owner in the scheme and didn't declare it, that probably is.
Yep. So again, that's the theory. The practice might be something else entirely, but it's just interesting in the context of what a body corporate record can actually be. And I think then, formal or informal, whatever it might be, it still can be caught. And then, of course, we move on to bodies corporate or committees actually creating social media channels for their communities, be that Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever it might be. And I think my two-word response to this, whenever anyone asks me about it, is bloody dangerous.
It's so this is a situation where the committee, for very sort of positive, constructive reasons, might set up, say, a Facebook group, closed Facebook group. And if you are an owner, I'm assuming a tenant as well, I don't actually know if that's the case in all cases, you can have access to that group. And that's a way that you can communicate about what's going on. Maybe there's a social event coming up. Maybe it's even a case where somebody says, I'm moving out on Saturday, so the driveway will be partially blocked for a couple of hours, just letting everybody know. It's a rough equivalent of putting a note in someone's mailbox saying there'll be a delivery van parked here, or we're having a party this weekend, that kind of thing. Maybe it's also a way, Frank, for people to book common facilities. So access to this pool, tennis court, all of that sort of stuff. So that's great. Pretty common, or not, reasonably common in larger schemes. Not necessarily just larger schemes, though. I would think you could see, couldn't you, a smaller scheme where everybody is relatively tech savvy, or a particular age group, and that's how they do all of their communications.
Yes, agree. And I think for me, the first thing I'd say are, what are the rules? What are the rules of engagement? So who's the moderator? Well, is there a moderator? Who's the moderator? What are they moderating? Are we allowing comments? Who's posting? Who's responding? Just all that sort of stuff. You know what I mean? Because this published stuff that's published by, I suppose, the committee in a body corporate context is almost without doubt a body corporate record. It's no different to sending a notice to all owners to say the half of the driveway is going to be blocked Saturday week because Chris is moving out. It's no different. That as much as that's, an immaterial body corporate record, it's still a body corporate record, isn't it?
That's right. And so, as you say, Frank, it might be a formal kind of method where the committee decides that's going to be one of our primary ways of communicating with everybody, social media, whatever the channel or platform might be. We would be saying, if you're going to be doing that, minute it, decide it, make those decisions about moderation, as you say, Frank, and comments. Are there actually going to be comments? Then, of course, you've got the situation. Sorry, Frank, go on. You're going to say?
Who are we going to block, and on what basis are we going to block them? And is that a reactionary block, or is it a proactive block?
So, Frank, I am a member of a couple of Strata-themed Facebook groups. I'm considering whether I continue, but anyway, that's another story. And I try and train myself not to comment for various reasons, but sometimes I can't help myself, so it's a work in progress there. But probably what the point I'm making is that sometimes you will see someone on one of those groups make a comment about a manager. Usually it's a manager. Sometimes it might be an owner. Sometimes it might be a lawyer. And it's pretty harsh, that's really dangerous, where groups are being formed and those comments, that might not be you as the administrator or the founder of the group making the comment, but my understanding, Frank, and I don't know if you know this or not, is that even if you don't make the comment, if you allow the comment to be made, you could actually be liable for the defamatory material it contains.
That certainly happened in News Limited. So I'm not sure whether legislation's been changed on that front or not. They certainly changed the legislation in relation to defamation about there needing to be serious harm before something can be defamatory now. So we probably won't see as many of the showstopper trials that have one's just concluded. But yeah, News Limited went under the bus for allowing comments on an article that turned out to be defamatory. So they're still allowing comments, so maybe the legislation's been changed there, but absolutely, if people post things, you could be a publisher. And even leaving aside the legal ramifications of allowing someone to post something that could be defamatory, is that what you want in your particular community? Like, if this is a communication tool, is it going to turn into an abuse tool? Because that immediacy of, you posting, that chairperson, he got away with it again, he's jammed another $3,000 through for legal fees. And my response to that is, we got to spend it because we're dealing with you, mate. It's sort of, stop. It's that is probably the more scary thing, because it can really degenerate really quickly. So I think that the guidelines, the rules of engagement, if a community is going to have one of those things, and I don't even have a template, I've never really mapped it out, other than say to clients, if you're going to do it, you need to think about this stuff, because it's going to be dependent on who's available at what time.
That immediacy issue is a big point in this discussion, Frank. It's probably the big difference between social media and other forms of communication in Strata. The immediacy is everything in social media. Literally, the instant the post is made, you get to see it if you've got notifications turned on in a certain way. And then, as you say, Frank, it very quickly spirals out of control, and within what appears to be no time at all, this discussion about your building or people involved in your building has gotten to a point where it's very hard to dial it back. And we go back to the previous points about those things being on the record then thereafter. And your comment, Danielle, thank you for your comment about defamation, becomes absolutely spot on in that
because
case.
the committee might have their rules, but there's no rules for the owners or the occupiers or the tenants who are just happen to be part of the community and think, well, oh, here's my chance, boom.
That's right. I think my view on it is, if as a committee you're thinking of using social media as your channel for communicating in the scheme, only do it where there is a really strong demand for it to be done. So again, if you've got a certain demographic of people that are really used to communicating that way, that makes sense, I guess. But if you're just offering it as another option because you think it's a good thing to do, yeah, I'd give it some second thoughts.
And it might even be the exclusionary thing. So maybe I've got an ideological objection to Facebook, and the committee decides we're going to communicate only on Facebook in relation to these things, and I'm not on it. So it's, Frank, if you want to play ball, you've got to come back. Are there alternative ways? Can you punch it out across 3 channels at the same time? Do you do Insta and Twitter and all that sort of stuff? And then suddenly there's other channels that you need to monitor as well as Facebook. It's sort of those are the questions, and I'm not saying we've got the answers here today, but as people start to deal with these things, they're the ones to think about, because they're the ones that are going to finish a dispute later on.
That's right, Frank. And one more point about social media we want to cover, and this is kind of a getting away from the records situation, but using social media to obtain information about Strata. So plenty of people use social media to put out information about Strata. I confess I'm guilty. I do it constantly. I'm very careful about how it's framed. I usually frame it as an invitation for people to think about something. What do you think about this? Could this work in this context? Very rarely would I ever be definitive and say this is really stupid or whatever. You're the same, Frank, to the extent that you do that kind of thing. It's absolutely the conservative thing to do. I personally think it's really dangerous to be taking your advice from other people on social media, especially if they have no qualifications, for starters. Yeah. Even if they do have qualifications, it's risky stuff, isn't it, Frank?
It is, but you don't know all the facts and circumstances. I don't know how many times I've spoken to clients who've, got Dr. Googled it. That might be fine. I've rung the commission's office and they said, that's great, mate. But what did you tell them?
Yeah.
Because I bet you haven't told them everything they need to know to be able to give you the actual answer to the question that you're asking. And even, lost count of the number of times clients have come in with, this is my problem. And by the time you dig in, no, that's not your problem. This is your problem.
Yep.
So there's just that. Yeah. So yeah, social media and advice, terrifying.
I've seen plenty of Strata advice given on social media by people who purport to be an expert, and you look at their background and qualifications and you think, well, yeah, they probably do know what they're talking about. And it's wrong. It's factually wrong. Even I would argue, Frank, even people like you and I who sort of deal in this stuff day in, day out, you make errors. I literally made an error today. I had to go back and very quickly amend it. Not on social media, somewhere else. But the point being that you can't be right all the time. And if you are going with that attitude and pushing it out on social media, it's going to come unstuck eventually. So therefore, your reliance on social media for Strata information, we would urge you to be pretty cautious about that. So even if Frank pushes out a tweet saying, blah blah, just take Frank's blah blah with a bit of caution. Just consider it.
It might not apply to your circumstances because of some reason that's particular to you.
And Frank, because you've only got 140 characters to say it, you can't give all of those qualifiers.
No.
It's just the way it is. just got a couple of questions there to finish up, but we want to really quickly rip into some of our best practice stuff. One thing that always comes up in social media, when we talk about social media, is bullying or e-bullying, if you want to think of it that way, the use of social media to harass people. There is a government agency called the E-Safety Commissioner. It's a federal government statutory authority, I believe. And we've got a link that we'll put up in a moment so for you to go and visit their website and get some information about that sort of topic. It's probably a good place to, if you're feeling impacted negatively by social media, it's a good place to go and get some information about what to do. Probably just to sum up our points, social media is great for what it is, but over-reliance upon it, Frank, big mistake in Strata.
Yeah, and I think probably I think people charge in without necessarily setting the rules. And there just needs to be, it can't be Mad Max type territory, sort of 2 men enter, 1 man leaves type thing. That's the rule. No, there needs to be a lot more guidelines around what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, maybe even communication with the community. If there are going to be rules in terms of moderation and blocking and comments and whatever, then to me, you've got to be able to post them somewhere where they're available to everyone, because it's, you want to know what the rules are. So it can work, but it's a real balance. Like, some things to me are absolute no-brainers. I don't know why you wouldn't do that. That's easy. Go for it. This one for me is a 50-50. Hand on heart, because I think there's some good things and some bad things. You've got to be really conscious about managing the bad things to take advantage of the good things with an overall community of people that are not necessarily going to see it the same way as you might.
That's an excellent way of putting it, Frank, I think. And probably the other point that we would make is, we reckon, always start from the assumption that if you start talking about your scheme or anything connected with your scheme, you should probably start from the assumption that that's going to be a record. That's just your safest way of doing it. And then everything which applies to a body corporate record, hopefully you will bear in mind. Doesn't necessarily mean that people will restrain themselves from what they say, but at least keep it in mind. Couple of questions there. Damo, thanks Damo. Would you see any major differences in social media use between an owner-occupier's majority complex versus an investment property rentals dominated complex? The only difference I can see, Damo, would be that in the latter, more people would be off-site, so they might rely more upon different kinds of communication as opposed to if they were all living there.
And I reckon the type of information they're looking for might be a bit different. So I think probably a consistent theme might be, Chris in Unit 36 just sold his property for 540 grand, which everyone wants to see, versus Frank just rented his, Unit 23 just rented for $400 a week. So it'd be interesting, because I mean, it's a good way to keep an eye on the market, if nothing else, because the one thing that everyone has in common in every strata community is you want your capital values and your returns to increase.
Absolutely, Frank. Well said. Thurston, coming a bit of a regular, thanks. Our body corporate manager has a habit of publishing defamatory information about owners in a scheme. You would think they'd know better. You would think they would know better.
Yes.
Yeah.
No emotional words.
Yeah, definitely. David, another regular, thanks very much. Do you consider a private and restricted email group the same as social media? I'm going to throw to you on that one first, Frank.
Well, I suppose, and I suppose this thing, WhatsApp, encrypted, it's great, blah, blah, blah. We see plenty of WhatsApp conversations make the media, not the least of which, I suppose, last federal election, there was that WA group, wasn't it, with Matthias Cormann and whatever, all in there. So is the stuff that's communicated in their body corporate record? Possibly, if you're all talking about body corporate stuff. Is it going to get to the body corporate manager? No, unless someone screenshots it and sends it in. And that's the thing for me with all of these things, is that clearly all these WhatsApp groups that appear in the media from political side of things, everyone's friends until they're not. So the only way that can appear in the media is someone's broken ranks because they've got the heebie-jeebies with someone else in there. And that can happen really easily. And that's where defamation comes from and all that sort of stuff. So I think no matter what you do, you've got to be tempered. And is that the sort of thing we're talking about today? Probably somewhere in the middle. It's not quite as open and publicly available. But even then, a closed Facebook group isn't dissimilar to a closed WhatsApp group.
That's right, Frank. And probably just very quickly, David, on that one, if that private restricted group is a bunch of owners who have got together, well, that's one thing. But if that private and restricted group is 4 members of a 7-person committee and the other 3 are not included on that discussion, that's a whole other issue. And that's a real problem if that would be the case. Karen, very quickly, many property managers have portals. What about this? Obviously, the property manager is the administrator. Yeah, but slightly different in that the portal is a facility for accessing information as opposed to, are you talking about whether the information published is difficult? It's an interesting one.
Yeah, no, so these are all the questions, you know what I mean? Like this stuff appears out of nowhere, well, not out of nowhere with social media for a while, but it's the first time we've really done a deep dive into it. Yeah. So these are the questions that lurk around.
There's a few questions there, so keep them coming. We'll either try and get to them later. This might actually be a part 2, I suspect. But for now, we have come to the end, well and truly, today. Thanks, everyone, very much. Don't forget, you can go to hineslegal.com.au or Hines Legal on Facebook and YouTube to watch these or listen to these later on, pose a few questions. For now, though, we've definitely come to the end. Frank, welcome.
Well, goodbye.
Oh, goodbye, as the case may be.
Goodbye from me and goodbye from him.
Welcome to goodbye. I'm so in the zone. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. A lot there to discuss. Thanks all. Bye.